Good morning and welcome to the show. Before we begin, the usual disclaimers. It's a busy day at home. We have lots of people around, so expect that there are going to be some interruptions during this podcast episode. And then, as usual, it's that time of the year. I've come down with a cold, so expect usual interruptions, coughing, sniffling, those sorts of things. And not to worry, eventually I'm going to hire an editor so that we can take out all the nasty, unwanted parts. So let's delve straight into the question for today. Now, the question is this: if someone calls you up and asks you for an offer, a proposal, a price list, or whatever, should you send one? Now, people that have some hesitation around these things, they do so understandably because there are people who call up, ask for the price, you send the information, and then you never hear from them again. And so, if you're one of those people who have suffered from those experiences multiple times, you begin to wonder, what's the point of having all these fancy flyers, the price list, the proposal, if I'm sending these things out and nobody's getting back in touch with me? In the month of February, you send out 500, you don't get a single phone call. In the month of March, you send out 800, maybe you get two phone calls, you don't get a deal. And so you wonder, is there any point, is there any reason why I should keep on sending out these offers and these proposals? Now, the answer or the approach is quite simple. Whenever someone asks you for an offer, a proposal, or a price list, yes, you should send it out, but that is provided that you're speaking to the right person and that the person has a right problem. And when we say right problem, we mean that it's a problem that you can solve, and that also that we're speaking with someone who has the authority to make a decision now at a reasonably determined point in the future. So long as you meet all these criteria, you'll find that sending out proposals, in this case, is not a bad idea because you have reasonable hopes of hearing back from someone. Because a lot of time, people call up just because they're curious, and if somebody's merely curious or asking on behalf of someone else, then we don't expect that we're going to be able to hear from them anytime soon. And then we don't expect that we're going to be able to build any business relationship with these people. So just to be sure that we've understood it correctly, yes, send out the proposal. So long as you're talking to the right person, there's a right problem, and the person has the authority to make all the decisions at a reasonably determined time now or in the future. Because, like I've stressed out in the podcast previously, if you're talking to the right person, they have the right problem, but they might decide today, they might decide next month, they might decide next year. Maybe they need the solution in 2 years. That is not a prospect that you should be spending your time with. Now, in traditional sales theory, we call this process qualification, discovery, and finally, questions around the decision making framework. Qualification, those are those questions that you engage in the conversation to be sure that you're talking to the right person. Discovery questions are just to make sure that we have the right problem and that the problem or the vision that they're pursuing is significant enough that they're going to make any decision anytime soon. So to flesh this out so that we can see how it works, today we're going to use the case study that we're going to use is in Nani service. Let's pretend that this is in Abuja, in Lagos, or in Port Harcourt, because people who live in metropolitan cities, oh, by the way, these are cities in Abuja, by the way. So for those of you who are listening, I guess the equivalent would be if you run a nanny service in, let's say, London, for those of you who live in the UK, or maybe Washington, D.C., for those of you who listen in America. I noticed that we also have some listeners in Russia, but I don't know any Russian cities. What's the capital of Russia? Oh boy, what's the capital of Russia? Moscow. Okay, so I'm glad I didn't betray my ignorance of geography. Okay, where are we? Okay, yeah, so you run a 90 service cosmopolitan city: Abuja, Lagos, London, Moscow, Washington, D.C. Now, these are services that are becoming really important because childcare is a problem. If you live in much more rural areas or you live close to home, it's not a problem because extended family members are there, they can always help out. But if you live in metropolitan cities, then that's a problem. So these 90 services are cropping up all over the place. If you live in any of these cities, especially Abuja, Lagos, or Port Harcourt, you've been seeing the offices along your street, business malls, or you've been seeing the advertisements coming up on Facebook, Instagram, and people have been sending you contacts over WhatsApp. So these services are there. So the scenario we're going to examine, not just for today, but for the next 3 or 4 days, because there are a couple of issues that are involved here, and I would like to flesh it out using detailed examples. So we're not going to be able to finish it in one podcast episode. That's because if we want to treat everything in one episode, it's going to be 30 or 45 minutes, and I want to keep this to 10 to 15 minutes, maybe 20 max. So let's get on with the brainstorming. So you run a nanny service in Abuja, someone calls up or they send an SMS, an email, or WhatsApp, and the structure of the conversation is usually, hello, the greetings, dear, whatever. So they get the greetings out of the way and they ask, do you have a nanny service? And then they go straight to the point. How much? And then the conversation ends with, please send me a flyer, send me a proposal, send me a price list. So you run a nanny service, someone has hit you up over email, or there's been a phone call. That's the structure of the conversation. What do you do? Now remember our general approach. We're looking for the right person with the right problem. I want to be sure that we're speaking to someone who can make decisions now or at some time in the future so that we do not waste our time. So the usual approach is that whoever takes the phone call has not, sorry about that, the cold, like I said. So the usual approach is that whoever is manning the phone or manning the emails or the WhatsApp inbox or the Instagram DM or whatever is usually not trained. So what they do is they say, thank you very much, ma, for calling. They send the flyer, they say bye-bye, and then they cross their fingers and then they hope for the best. That's what most people do. And that is what leads to those disappointing scenarios where for your nanny service, you open up in January, you send out 400 flyers. At the end of the month, nobody calls. February, you send out another 400 flyers, nobody calls. That's what leads to those disappointing scenarios. Now, the best approach, like I've said, also in previous podcasts, we should be trying to engage people in conversations. The conversation should be built around questions. And then in this case, the questions we're just trying to figure out, are we speaking to the right person? Do they have the right problem? Another reason why this is important, sorry, excuse me, I have a really bad cold. Okay, I guess I should go to the pharmacy after this. Oh, by the way, I'm not endorsing drug abuse. So if you have any health problems, go see a doctor. But yes, I'll be going to the pharmacy right after this to sort myself out. So where was I? Okay, yeah, so asking questions. Make sure that we have the right person and they have the right problem. Now, another reason why we have to ask all these questions is because we need information to send the right proposal. Because sometimes the reason why we don't hear back from people is because we sent the wrong proposal. For instance, nanny service, just like we're talking about. Some nanny services have a corporate package. We'll come by your office. If the office has a baby room, we can stay downstairs in the baby room, take care of the baby, so that if you have to come down to breastfeed, we're right there. Those sorts of things. Now I know some of you Nigerians might think, oh, this is really highfalutin, doesn't make sense. But actually, and surprisingly, it does. There are such organizations like that, because back when wifey and I were in Lagos, and she had to do some work with, she works with a government regulator, but they had to do some work with, I can't remember the name of the organization, one of these financial services firms, and their office is I think it's in Idumota. I think it's Idumota, of all places, surprisingly. But they had a room where you could come with your nanny, and the nanny sits down there in the room with the baby. If you need to breastfeed, you come down, you sort that out. If you wanted, tutors could come over. You could make your private arrangements, basically. So it was surprising because not only was it in Lagos, it was also in Idumota, and that's not really the best parts of town per se. I would have expected organizations to have these kinds of provisions in, what's it called? Victoria Island, all those posh places. So this is not exactly a posh part of town, but yes, so they had that. So there may be few and far in between, but there's now becoming that awareness, and so employers are beginning to make those options available. So there are some nanny services that have corporate packages. There's a nanny service that we ran into in Abuja that has a wedding package. So you're bride and groom, you want to do the wedding. Some of your guests might have children, so you hire these people. They corner off a space in the excuse me. So the corner of a place in the wedding hall, so that the children can be taken care of, and then the adults can enjoy, drink, dance, alcohol, twerk, do whatever it is that they need to do. And then at the end of the day, you come pick up the kids and then you go home. Some nanny services that have a daily drop off, and then the normal one that everybody's familiar with is nanny services that have house services. So someone is sent directly to your house, who comes either every day or the person lives in with you guys. So if someone calls, you guys have this conversation, you don't ask any questions, you might send the corporate packages, but the person is looking for domestic living, you send the wrong package. It's also possible that just for convenience, when you are setting up your nanny service, you get your branding boys, your website boys, to have everything put on one page or one flyer, and you send that out. Now that's a little bit much, because we've talked about corporate, wedding, daily drop off, and then what else? And then house services. Now that's quite a lot, especially since each one is going to have several subs. So the corporate package is going to have sub 1, sub 2, sub 3. Wedding package is going to have sub 1, sub 2, sub 3, depending on how many nannies, what the nannies are going to do, things like that. So with all those subs, somebody might receive the proposal, open it. It's a lengthy document with 15 options, and then they just say, I will think about this later, and they leave it stored on their phone or whatever, and then they forget. And that's part of the reason why you're not hearing back from them. So that's why this is the best approach. Questions, make sure you're speaking to the right person, the right problem. It also gives you all the information that you need so you can give the right proposal. So if someone just says, please give me a document with the price, how do you initiate the conversation? Because if the person says, give me a document with the price, and you go straight into asking questions, the average Nigerian is going to feel like he or she is locked in an interrogation. So how do you go about initiating this qualification and discovery process, the process of asking questions? First of all, you agree, then you ask permission. In asking permission, you justify the reason why you're asking questions, and then you go ahead and just start asking questions, because most people are reasonable and most people are not going to object. What to do when someone objects, we're going to get to that in a future episode. So if someone says, can you send me a proposal, or can you send me a price list? You say, absolutely, ma, no problem. I can send that to you. But I have to ask you a few questions first, because I need to be sure that I'm sending you the right proposal, because we have several packages. So I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions right now, ma. I hope you don't mind. And of course, she's going to say, no problem. Now, in this case, since it's a nanny service, the possible questions that you could ask, I think with common sense we can figure out what a couple of questions would be. But by the way, for those of you who run nanny services listening to this podcast, of course I'm going to ask some questions that probably don't make sense, or maybe I could have asked better questions. But I don't run a nanny service, so forgive me for things that I get wrong. But I'm just freestyling here, so that not just you who run nanny services in Abuja, Lagos, and Port Harcourt, but also so that people who run other businesses, whether you're a carpenter or baker or whatever, you're going to be able to get examples of questions and conversation frameworks that you can use in your own business. So a possible question: how many kids? The reason why this question is important, because it determines the number of hands that you're going to need for the job. If the woman says 1 kid, then you have a fair idea of how many hands you need. If the woman says, on the other hand, that she has 7 kids, then, anyway, I don't know what the best practice is, but should you send one nanny to a woman who has 7 children? I have no idea. Oh, and yes, there are Nigerians that have 7 children. One of my aunts has 8. 8, there's 5, 8, 5, 7. So yeah, people still do have large families in this day and age. Then you also need to know what it is that they need the nanny for. Is it childcare? Some people don't really need childcare per se. They need a tutor. That's for those people who have children who are much older. Maybe the children are like 13, 14. So at that age, you don't really need a nanny per se. Just a tutor to make sure children don't get into trouble. They finish their homework, stuff like that. Do you need someone for cleaning? Do you need someone for cooking? All this information is also important. Of course, there's also going to be questions around the location. Where is the home? Where is the office? Where is the event? And the reason why those questions are important is because It's because with those questions, you're going to have to figure out the dress code. What should the nannies wear? Qualification. Who should you be sending? Because if it's a corporate type thing, she would have to be dressed appropriately, and then maybe someone who is much more polished, if I can put it that way. Then, of course, transportation costs also come into it. That's why location is also important. Then you also have to ask questions around the start date, and you also have to ask questions around the work schedule. And that's important because it's you're going to need that to be able to match the inventory that you have on hand. Because it's possible that if they need someone to start today, you don't have anyone. So maybe there's no point in sending out the proposal. But if they need someone to start in 3 weeks or in a month, then yes, you might have someone who matches that. So these are the sorts of questions that my guess is people who run nanny services would have to ask. Well, of course, for those of you who are actually in the business of providing nannies, you know much more appropriate questions. So, from the freestyling that we've done here, I'm sure you guys will be able to appreciate the bottom line that sending a proposal or handling the pricing conversation is going to involve different quotes depending on what is needed and who it is that you're talking to. So, you can't just say, "Thank you very much, ma, for calling," and then send off a price document. You have to ask all these questions because at the end of the day, the pricing, the proposal that you send, the price quote that you send is going to be different if it is a mother of one who lives 30 minutes outside of the city center and she only wants the person to come twice a day. That's a different quote. But then, if there's a mother of seven who lives in the city center, but her and her husband work until 8 p.m. every day, and then some driving is going to be involved because the nanny will have to go and pick up the kids from school or something like that, that's a separate quote. So you can't just say "thank you very much, ma, for calling" and then send off a price list and then hope to hear from the person if you haven't had this conversation. If you've had the conversation with the mom of one who only needs somebody for 2 days, you're going to be able to send a proposal that is tailored to her and that makes sense. And so when she's comparing with other service providers, she has something specific and it's not overwhelming. The same thing with the mom of seven. You send something tailored to her, specific, not overwhelming. She's going to be able to make a decision. So this is the proper way to handle when people calling and say how much, send me a price list, send me a proposal. These are the sorts of conversations that you should engage in. So we're well past the 15-minute mark and I'm going to bring it to a close right now. I notice that majority of you are still listening to the podcast from the web browser, so you can subscribe for free. The name of the podcast is Sales for the Nigerian Business Person Podcast. And the free subscription services that you can use are Spotify, there's Google, Apple iTunes. That's, I think, the most popular one. There's Pocket Cast, there's Anchor, there's Overcast, or use whatever podcast player of your choice. As usual, I'm your host, Tabishima, and yes, that rhymes with Hiroshima. And I'll see you guys at the next episode.